Strategy sprang from a very old human need, the need for people to defeat their enemies, from the most primitive disputes between tribes to the early skirmishes before the battle, or the final attack in a massive conflict. All instances of war follow a strategy. Thus, we tend naturally to associate strategy with any struggle between competing entities, whatever the scenario. In fact, one of the most famous Latin works in the area of military strategy, under the Greek title of Strategemata, describes a compilation of stratagema, that is, stratagems, or literally, tricks of war. Interesting assumption. As interesting as the narrow geographic meaning, Roman historians gave to the term strategia territories under control of a strategist, a military commander in ancient Athens and a member of the Council of War. Much war and warfare and several revolutions of the most varied scope were needed until the notion of strategy, in the sense that it is understood today, emerged. In the military community, with Count Guibert and La Stratégique in 1799, in the business world, with Chester Barnard's recommendations in his 1938 classic, The Functions of an Executive, and later in Igor Ansov's book, Corporate Strategy, in 1965.
Whether it's a chessboard or a business environment or a military battlefield, there is no universal advice.
But the trouble is we view strategy as a planning process instead of a learning process.
Creating the future is about learning.
For a lot of companies, it's tough for them to escape from that change.
It's not a magic.
We're talking about calculation and evaluation, courage.
The outcome is finding some direction.
Having real clarity about what's going to make you different.
What it is now and what it wants to be.
Yeah, but how do you come to that? How do you get there? Do you get there in a flash?
Learn about yourself.
Your own thinking.
A certain DNA.
You know, your inner voice.
What kind of imagination you have.
What are you doing to position yourself for the future?
It is person-specific and it's timing-specific.
The job of the CEO is to create the future while managing the present.
Any chief executive who hires a consulting firm to give them a strategy should be fired.
And advantage is had from whatever there is, while usefulness rises from whatever is not. Not the usual phrasing, but quite an insight on strategy from a Lao Tzu poem that explains why another Chinese work on war, Sun Tzu's Art of War, which might be the first treatise on the subject, has been adopted as a cherished member in the family of management literature.
Strategy is not about doing the same thing better. Strategy is about finding that different place for the organization to deliver value.
Like when you are on the military battlefield, if you have cavalry, you want the valley. If you are fighting against cavalry, you're looking for the hills. So same's here.
If you're a businessman, and if you have a feel for the people, if you know the psychology of the customers, that's all it takes.
Whether it's a chessboard or a business environment or a military battlefield. And you have to figure out, what are your resources and what is the best strategy and the tactical implementation of the strategy right now.
The outcome is finding some direction that you can take the organization in that's going to be effective.
It's very much depending on who it is and what kind of imagination you have as opposed to the framework of strategy.
The trouble is we view strategy as a planning process instead of a learning process.
It's the power of mental patterns, the trigger effect of metaphors and similes, and the subtlety of their charm. It's the insinuating suggestion of the well-known when taken out of its original context and into an unexpected scenario. Just as Byzantine Emperor Maurice, who ruled 582 to 602 AD, did in the less explored Strategicon, another work on war strategy, in which he compared war strategy, and hence business strategy, to hunting. Wild animals are taken by scouting, by nets, by lying in wait, by stalking, by circling around, and by other such stratagems rather than by sheer force. In waging war, one should do likewise. To try simply to overpower the enemy in the open, hand-to-hand and face-to-face, is a very risky enterprise that can result in serious harm. even if the enemy is defeated.
We talk about calculation and evaluation, courage.
I think what we need is common sense.
What makes it challenging is you have to do both of these things at the same time.
I think that most important thing to start is to analyze your own strengths and your own weakness. And it could be in very different proportions for you, for me, for anywhere else.
How do you come to that? How do you get there? Do you get there in a flash?
You got to keep assimilating best practices, but at the same time having real clarity about what's going to make you different.
Just as in today's business environment, the hard set of technical skills and competencies, both acquired and given as left-brain gifts, seems to recede as the sole determining factor of success, while the true meaning of strategy moves far beyond its traditional gist. Strengths and weaknesses analysis, roadmaps, long-term objectives, action plans. Simply put, strategy becomes less instrumental.
Well, in very simple terms, it's what's going to make a particular organization different and provide a competitive advantage.
What we say in chess that tactics is knowing what to do when and where there's something to do, while strategy is knowing what to do when and where there's nothing to do.
Strategy is a learning process. It's not a planning process.
There is a huge difference between having a strategy and then having a large strategic planning process. Yes. The idea that if you've got a strategic planning process, or you're going to be trying to predict exactly how many toasters you're going to be selling 3 years from now in Northwest Australia, that doesn't work anymore, and it probably never worked. Okay. There are people today who say strategy is dead.
I think it's something about our ability to always look for new horizons.
The 3 boxes being, box 1 is manage the present, box 2 is selectively forget the past, and box 3 is create the future. Manage the present, box 1, selectively abandon the past, box 2, and create the future, box 3. And more often than not, organizations focus on box 1 and think they are doing strategy. And while box 1 is terribly important, strategy is really about box 2 and box 3.
It's not a magic, go off to a retreat and come back with a brilliant strategy.
Why is it then that strategy is widely perceived as intangible and ethereal, a conceptual rather than a factual framework closely connected to vision, mission, values? It seems we tend to overrate its power as a driving force when we lack one, and underestimate its contribution once we've reduced it to an operational planning tool. Like a mirage, so real and appealing as desirable and unattainable. Unlike a mirage, with a grounded, solid counterpart. In fact, it's the complementary nature of strategy and tactics which has defined their intertwined existence and their open or covert double play. In the military realm, tactics teach the use of armed forces in engagements, while strategy teaches the use of engagements to achieve the objectives of the war. In war, actions become strategic or tactical depending on whether they relate to the form or the significance of the engagement. Quite natural, then, that Karl von Clausewitz, a Prussian general with the most impact on strategy and the author of On War, probably the most famous treatise ever on the subject, viewed war as a duel between 2 independent minds. An interesting vision, especially when extrapolated to the world of business. Back to square one. A distractive move, you may think, or a retreat before a deeper attack. If war and business have existed from the beginning of times, and obviously they're part of the essence of human interaction, as such, they share traits whose understanding may help define the common grounds and critical diversions. For example, if strategy originates from the need of peoples to defeat their enemies, with no enemies, the need for strategy seems non-existent. Danger. We should go beyond ready-made conclusions and think this over. Kenichi Ohmae, acclaimed Japanese business strategist and author of The Mind of the Strategist, among other books, has said that the sole purpose of strategy is to enable a company to gain, as efficiently as possible, a sustainable edge over its competition. Again, a sustainable edge.
Strategy is essentially the way that a company defines what it is now and what it wants to be. and how it's going to get to that point.
Creating the future is about learning. Abandoning the past is about forgetting. Organizations don't have as much problem in learning as much as they have in forgetting.
Learn about yourself, learn about the opponent, and then try to create conditions where your strengths will be dominant while opponent's strengths will be disregarded.
Strategy is finding a different way to compete, to create a different sort of value for the customer, which allows a company to prosper, to achieve superior profitability.
Anytime when we have to make a big decision, there's some sort of, your inner voice. Maybe I should do this. But many of us very often don't want to listen to this very quiet voice. No. We have to look at the data. We have to get, the formula, mathematical formula. It should be proven. It should be a perfect decision. There are no perfect decisions.
Having a good strategy at one point doesn't mean that it will continue and be successful for you there and after for a long time.
There is no single strategy. There is no strategy forever. And there is no strategy that guarantees victory over the opponent. Clausewitz suggests this possibility when he speaks about two independent minds in a duel. In other words, war and hence strategy imply the interaction, the intercourse, the collision of both intellectually driven plans and artistically crafted visions. So, on the battlefield, as in business,
basically, competition is destructive when companies are basically competing on the same thing. That forces competition to gravitate to price.
If you developed a good strategy, you had a competitive advantage, it's probably going to last you 5, 10, maybe 15 years. These days, competitive advantages are being competed away faster than ever. So that one that may have lasted 10 years before now may last you 2 years, a year.
The job of the CEO is to create the future while managing the present. And there are different systems, different organizations, different processes, and different rewards that are needed for the future than for managing the present.
This is a very, very difficult time. You see, you talk about the business system, value chains, resource-based. You sort of look at all these strategies that scholars talk about. Today, it's not these frameworks that would create a good strategy. It is person-specific and it's timing-specific.
So that's why being aggressive, being an attacker, gives you, in my view, an edge, competitive edge. It does not guarantee you from losing time to time. But, in overall picture, I think it puts you ahead of your opposition.
In any industry, you've got to look at the power of the customer, the power of the supplier, the barriers to entry, the threat of substitute products, and the nature of the rivalry itself, and that those 5 forces collectively define really the profit potential of any business.
Because if we succeed in a very tough competitive field, and we feel happy, and we feel that now we reached our limit, so it depends very much on our ability to actually sort of to go beyond it, to look for new horizons, to look for new challenges. So challenging your own success.
Garry Kasparov, chess grandmaster, former world chess champion, the youngest ever, and for many the greatest chess player of all time, speaks out of experience. The author of How Life Imitates Chess, Making the Right Moves, uses only his experience with that fascinating ancient war game, combining the excitement of tactics with the intricacies of long-range strategy.
I try to share my experience as a decision maker. Chess has no direct analogy with life. Also, people compare it to war and try to look for some symbols behind the chess pieces. But what was important throughout my professional chess career is how I learned to make decisions, to analyze decisions, to look objectively at the whole process, to look at the results, to understand why I failed and also why I succeeded.
I maintain that any company, I've said this often, that any company, any chief executive who hires a consulting firm to give them a strategy should be fired.
That is the job of the CEO.
Strategies are learned. Consultants can help you think it through and ask questions and do analyses and check competition and get facts and statistics.
That's why following just this generic advice might be either productive or counterproductive, since in my view, decision making is as unique as DNA or fingerprinting.
Strategy is the way the company defines itself and what it decides that it wants to be and become, and how it sort of aims itself in that direction.
That's what I keep saying again and again in the book. Universal advice is very often, if not always, counterproductive. So you have to you have to improve your quality as the analyst by making sure that you're very objective in anticipating the current situation.
In fact, this is what separates a chief strategist from others. The ideas of when to conduct a direct frontal assault, defend a strategic post, or launch a surprise counterattack appear to be simple, straightforward concepts. But each involves a constant assessment of resources, timing, and planning. By the way, are we talking business, war, or chess?
Doing this self-analysis, you have to be very objective, because your action or inaction depends very much on the position.
Whenever we look at an industry and whenever we look at how companies compete, we've got to always be sensitive to, where are the right boundaries and how are those boundaries evolving.
First thing he needs to do is push back from his desk, maybe take a walk on the beach, get a little away from the crisis and fires that will be burning around him all the time.
I think that, part of the discipline of strategy is actually coming up with a workable set of industry boundaries and starting to understand when those boundaries need adjustment.
Odds today in this, on the big business geopolitical casino, are in favor of those who are more active.
As a direct consequence of that personal involvement of the strategist, both in the analysis and the anticipation, the tactics and the aspiration, strategy is imbued with that deeply cultural, definitely attitudinal meaning that the first works on the subject gave to it. No matter how subtle these considerations on its essence and its practice may seem, we can still find today, hidden underneath any strategy, some of the strength above all factor that Clausewitz considered key, as well as some of the respectful cunning Chinese philosophy saw at the heart of good strategy. They do not know it is the player's hand that dominates and guides their destiny. They do not know an adamantine fate controls their will and lays the battle plan. That's the Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges, describing the stance of the faint-hearted king, the sly bishop, the ruthless queen, the deceitful pawn, and the straightforward castle over the checkered black and white terrain in his poem, Chess, an inviting reference to one of the expected conditions under which strategies are defined and decisions are made: uncertainty. Leo Tolstoy's premise in War and Peace was that man attains his greatest freedom in battle. If this is so, then that freedom is preceded and interceded by the creation of strategy. Thus can be taken by those bold enough to move forward without certainty. For the unexpected offers the most fertile setting to engage one's intellect. If chess imitates life through the metaphor of war, then it also talks business.
You don't need a sophisticated model, you don't need the anthropologist or any of these people. You don't need the scholars, in fact. You need normal wives and husbands and normal people, normal merchants.
What is important that there are inner qualities, and those who know how to combine these data with our own qualities and to make sure that we create the best structure for our success as a decision makers, those will be on the winning side.
There are lots of things that managers do that they have to do to actually keep making the company more productive and more efficient and to attain the kind of latest technology and knowledge about management. All those things are a necessity, but they're not strategy.
And many times we know what new things we have to do. We have a tough time trying to give up the old ones.
It's very tough for a company to change its strategy, but it's even tougher to change its culture.
Unless you try, you will never find out whether good or bad. So in my view, you have to try, because that's the only way to actually be ahead of the competition.
Strategists must accept that they will never have the full picture, all the information, or the complete spectrum of foreseeable events. The development of strategy requires the courage to accept uncertainty. As the French have said, strategy is the art of conducting war not by means of coup d'oeil, that is to say, not by just looking at what's ahead from behind your horse's ears.
It's remarkable how few strategies actually work their way down to really finding where that competitive advantage will be.
For example, Steve Jobs, the Rolling Stone products. Came back to Apple, came up with some idea. Before him, they were still struggling with Macintosh. But he had a different idea. But only he could have negotiated with Mick Jagger to download their products, Rolling Stone products, onto iPod. In that first instance, made other musicians to follow suit.
The only way to improve it is just to follow and then to understand why your intuition, because intuition is a combination of your experience, of your determination, of your, it's a part of the character. Why you fail or succeeded.
IKEA has a strategy today. It's very clear. You've never been in an IKEA store. You need 15 minutes to know what the strategy is, right? You just walk in and you can see what's going on. It's a very startling, clear, simple strategy, but it didn't come overnight.
The name of the game is to think differently. And innovation is all about your own thinking, your own feel for what the customers will take.
Industries are very different today than they were 30 years ago. We're much more global, there's different technology, things move at different speed, but actually the same 5 forces still determine profitability. It's still the power of the customer, the power of the suppliers.
But uncertainty is not a product of not having complete information. It's a question of constant change, disruptive change, the result of frameworks and paradigms constantly rewritten by all players and not necessarily playing the same game. This new reality we could define as liquid, following Polish sociologist Zygmunt Bauman. A new and unprecedented setting with social forms and institutions that no longer have enough time to solidify and serve as frames of reference for long-term plans.
As a CEO, you have to explain to the organization why these inconsistencies exist, because they require different expertise, different talent, different management orthodoxy, therefore different rewards.
I'd say that the boundaries of industries can certainly evolve and shift and change. I'm not sure that they're not clear. At any given point in time, by thinking about fundamental economics, we need to draw a set of boundaries at that moment. And so what we called a phone before is that industry definition is probably now a broader definition.
Because everybody can collect this data. You can look at these computers and we all have access to the same information. You can't win on being 1 second ahead of me and just receiving maybe in the stock market, but again, it's a minimal win.
Like IKEA with 15 years of learning to get to its business model.
Core business is 95% knowledge. New business is 95% assumptions. So you've got to set up a different rewards for a venture which is 95% assumptions than a venture which is 95% knowledge.
Such lack of certainty requires not only courage, but flexibility, adaptability, resilience. to be constantly ready and willing to change not only tactics, but strategy on short notice, to abandon commitments and loyalties without regret, and willingly overtake others to be ready to pursue opportunities according to their current availability and not to expectations.
You can't improve your intuition unless you rely on it. You can lose time and again by being proactive and by trusting your intuition. What I believe that in the modern world, not doing it will almost guarantee that you'll be on the losing side.
If you look at the sudden death of corporation or industry today, most of these companies and industries have ignored the early signs of major change.
I think in some sense everything has changed. But at least from my point of view, very little has changed in the sense that the enduring fundamentals of industry structure and the value chain and the importance of price and cost in determining superior performance, the distinction between operational effectiveness and positioning.
It is a requirement inside GE that they have to say, what are you doing to position yourself for the future? What are you doing to shore up the present? It has become a language inside GE, the way they talk, the way they behave, they will allocate resources.
Strategic planning in that sense of thinking that you're going to be able to predict what the world will be like in 3 years and base your business on it, that's no longer true.
It's wrong for business schools to be teaching the framework, because then the new students will always learn the framework first and start thinking about the strategy with that framework.
Listen, forgetting. Because box 2 is about forgetting. Box 3 is about creating. Creating the future. The 3 boxes being box 1 is manage the present. Box 2 is selectively forget the past. And box 3 is create the future.
Today, decision makers must strategize, act, plan, and calculate the likely gains and losses of acting or failing to act under conditions of endemic uncertainty, ever-growing discontinuities, permeating boundaries, and on equally uncertain chains of events generated by a dynamic and thinking array of opponents. Those strategists able to distinguish, anticipate, domesticate those subtle transitions will certainly maintain a tangible advantage. The inherent uncertainty embedded in strategy is one of the primary reasons why so many business leaders cling to the tangible world of tactics and operations. Tactics and operations offer a safety blanket and a paradoxical excuse, easier to control, less sensitive to outer influence, compatible with blind compliance. They are the perfect explanation for those who worship execution, those who desperately need to write done under the status heading of their action plan. They are the perfect alibi for those leaders with an overwhelming urge to win and an even more restless call that relentlessly rejects the mere chance of losing. But beware, execution is strategy. Without implementation capacity, there is no fulfillable strategic intent. That's why the outcome is included in its definition. Porter Dixit, strategy is finding a different way to compete, to create a different sort of value for the customer, which allows the company to prosper, to achieve sustainable profitability.
Any company, when it competes, is simply conducting a lot of activities, marketing activities, procurement activities, service activities, and so forth. And the value chain provided a framework for understanding how a particular company was competing versus its competitors, and therefore sharpening the distinctions in terms of its position.
The entrepreneur can start out with an idea, a brilliant concept, but with time, as a company achieves any volume at all, it's going to probably have to have a thought out and spelled out strategy.
If I'm walking like that, does my left foot go first or my right foot go first? Which one follows and which one leads?
When you decide on your strategy, you still have to implement it. And here intuition is crucial.
Same thing with strategy and structure. You don't start fresh with strategy. You start, unless you're creating a new company, you start with the existing structure. So structure influences strategy, even if it needs changing, and strategy influences structure.
Bruce Pandolfini, one of the world's great chess teachers, speaking about strategy, chess, and business, said few people saw chess as an intimate, personal game. But that's what it is. Exceptional chess players learn a lot about their opponents from their opponents. Sometimes it comes down to psychological warfare, mental toughness, physical stamina, courage. Go for the small advantages and never let them see you sweat. Quite a mind game. Same as in business. To train his students in that mind frame, he used to make them sit at a board and talk chess. They were not allowed to move the pieces physically. They could only tell their moves. They had to play the game in their heads. Not an easy task, but we all can do it. At first, it feels like work, but with time and practice, it becomes intuition.
Some people are not very comfortable in relying on their intuition. I can recommend them just to train it as a muscle. You know, when we want to improve our muscles, we do a lot of exercise.
Human beings by nature are imaginative and innovative. Think about it this way. Suppose somebody put me in this room. After about half an hour, because human beings, we don't like boundaries. If somebody put me in this room, after about half an hour, I want to go outside. I feel constrained.
Strategies don't come down from pigeon strategies. The consultants fly over and they drop their strategies as they fly over, you know, and in the form of, you can imagine what comes down from a pigeon.
You have to know what's best for you. Some people are much better in slow motion, and they should try to create conditions where their strengths will be displayed prominently. Some people are more aggressive, so obviously they have to create this landscape for their advantage.
Risk by definition, innovation by definition is an experiment with unknown outcomes. That means you are going to fail 9 out of 10 times. And if you don't reward people for failure, then they start doing the safe things.
Just as Pandolfini, Vijay Govindarajan, an expert in strategy and innovation, believes that strategic transformation won't result from 1, 2, 3 quick moves, no matter how impressive they may look. Leaders have to get the drivers of the expected transformation embedded, institutionalized in the organization, so that change arises naturally in every decision at all levels, naturally and repeatedly, as it becomes the intuitive response of all decision makers. That's the only way strategic positions can be built and sustained, and strategic power increased, so that there is no chance of successful defense or counterattack left. Remember, in chess, in war, in business, trying to win a game in the fewest number of moves suggests that you are underestimating your opponent as practically incompetent, putting all your efforts on the short term, playing on the safe side of quick returns, underutilizing your organization's talents.
After I won the title, it was a big celebration, of course. I got this laurel and everybody was smiling. I was thrilled by this success. Age 22, the youngest world champion ever, and one of the persons who approached me was Rona Petrosian. She was the wife of the former chess world champion Tigran Petrosian, and she said something that stunned me. The young man, she said, I was sorry for you. And I stared at her because it was least expected at that moment. And she continued, I'm sorry for you because the happiest day of your life has just passed. The bad news, she might be right. She might have been right. But the good news for me that at least I got a new goal to prove her wrong.
The biggest advice I gave is, if you really want to have innovation, you got to create the culture. Because if you don't create the culture, innovation doesn't thrive.
Whole Foods, that is in the business of, it's a grocery store, but it's all about natural, fresh, locally grown, sustainable agriculture. They've really made that what they stand for. And that isn't attractive to every customer, but there's quite a few customers that really buy into a concept that's good for the environment and that's supporting the small family farms.
The recent example, in my view, is Steve Jobs. It's a person who doesn't stay with his success. So he doesn't stand still. So he always wants to move ahead, and he's trying to hit the market with new products. So he doesn't want to be hit by the competition, and he wants to be always keep an innovation edge.
Had the PC and Windows OS not penetrated to the extent, they couldn't have done it. If Macintosh were the only PC in the world, they couldn't have had the success of iPod.
Now we can look at the list of those who are trying to be also always innovative, but unfortunately, the majority is trying to be conservative.
Reasons for that reluctance may vary. Sometimes the hindering factor is corporate culture or legacy. Some other times, a discouraging context.
So that's why we're not seeing a lot of, the breakthrough inventions. If we look at the history of greatest technological innovations over the last 30 years, they didn't come from luxurious boardrooms, mainly from garages or dining rooms. So where people created things that eventually took over the market.
I've written a number of books about strategy. I think my first really major book on strategy was a book called Competitive Advantage, and I think the really major message of that was really how to look at the industry in which you compete, and how to think about what causes industry profitability, and how by understanding that a company can improve its own position. In that book, I introduced the so-called 5 forces framework.
Can you come up with a framework for Kindle strategy? It's very difficult to do so. There's no sort of example like this. Yeah. For Nintendo DS and Wii, there's no sort of framework.
I've always focused not on the specifics of how a particular industry operates or a particular company competes. I've always been looking at really the deep fundamental underpinnings of competition.
iPod has eliminated CD rental, etc., or even CD sales, and pretty soon we'll see a major problem of bookstores with the Kindle-like products spreading through the world. And therefore, there are signs of change, but most of these industries and also companies, established companies, have ignored the early signs.
It's not because they don't understand the technology. It is not because they don't understand the market. It's not because they don't understand the customer. It is typically a leadership failure.
Once again, people come first. Let's keep on stressing the triple connection we've been exploring while delving into the complex makings of strategy. Lawrence of Arabia developed in his 1926 work, The 7 Pillars of Wisdom, one of the first theories of guerrilla warfare. He said the secret was to operate like a cloud of gas, inactive and invisible most of the time, reliant on dispersion and mobility for success. The same could be said of strategy, which should be spread and well known to everyone in the organization. And the same could be said of the leaders responsible for its implementation. The guerrilla spirit helps them free themselves from the sweet chains of patronizing tactics. Against the controversial expression in chess, play the board, not the man. When you play the game of business, if you want to be strategic, distinctive, unique, the rules of engagement change. You play the man.